Rules for the remnant. But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. 1 Thessalonians 5 1 through 3. Situation. That day was supposed to be like any other. Before it happened, life went on like it always had: work, school, play, family. But then it happened, and now no one knows what is going on. All anyone knows is that a bunch of people and all the children have disappeared. So if you're reading this and you find yourself in the above scenario, know that this event is called the rapture of the church. The church is not a particular denomination, but rather is a people from all walks of life. Anyone who has either placed their faith in the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ, or is under the age of what we would call accountability, or lacks the mental capacity to make critical decisions for themselves. These are caught up to heaven, and they have been changed from the mortal to immortal and now exist in the reality of eternity. They have been given perfect, flawless, and timeless bodies to exist with and in the divine order for the rest of eternity. This was the rapture. It's in the Bible. Read it for yourself and you can find out. You can see this in John 14, 1 through 3, 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18, 2 Thessalonians 2, 1 through 3, 1 Corinthians 15, 50 through 56, Philippians 3, 20 through 21, and Revelation 3:10. So if you are reading this, you need to know what is coming, and your life and eternity will absolutely depend on it. I'm going to lay out the timeline here, and this is just a general order of events. The rapture, this just happened. The church is rescued, and evil is no longer restrained on the earth. And there's going to be a gap in time. We don't know how long it'll last, but perhaps months or even a couple of years. But there is a window of time between the rapture of the church and the official start of the tribulation. And during this gap, there are several things that we think will likely happen. Number one, Muslim nations surrounding Israel will take advantage of the global chaos and launch an attack and are defeated, greatly expanding Israel's current borders. Now, this may happen before the rapture. We're not entirely sure, but in this particular scenario, it happens afterwards. And the second part of this is that Russia, Turkey, Iran, Libya, and Sudan, and other nations aligned with them will go to war against the nation of Israel. No other nation comes to their aid, and God supernaturally defeats them. And we can find this in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. And these two events fundamentally destroy as a militant belief system in the world. Israel then begins to rebuild her third temple. Number two, the world will reorganize into 10 regional powers. This global system comes to be known as the beast. Now, even though they're regional powers, they will likely fall under an overarching global infrastructure governance that will uh, govern all the different regions. And out of the 10 regional governments, three will be overthrown, and one man, who we know now as the Antichrist, rises to power. He will be aided by another one known as the false prophet. Now, likely these guys are not going to be called the Antichrist, and they're not going to be called the false prophet. However, you can note the actions that they take here. And when one man assumes the majority of power over this regionalized global government, you can be pretty sure that this is the Antichrist. And he will have a aide de camp, so to speak, a man that will be out championing him left and right. And this man will have supernatural powers. And this is how you can know that this man is the false prophet. They create a mark, and by the midpoint, it's a quantum dot tattoo or some kind of a digital tattoo of sorts that goes on top of the skin on the right hand or the forehead. And without this mark, you cannot buy or sell anything. You cannot participate in the economy. You are locked out of the world system. However, do not take this mark. If you take this, you are dooming yourself for all eternity in the lake of fire. Now, as I said at the beginning, when these guys first show up, they're not going to appear to be evil. They're going to be incredibly popular, and they're going to seem to have all the solutions to all the problems. And there might even be a temporary peace where things seemingly go their way. But these are the same guys that are going to enforce this mark by the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, also arriving on the scene somewhere in this time period is going to be two witnesses. These are Jewish witnesses who many scholars believe will be a resurrected Moses and Elijah. And they will be brought forth to be a witness in the land of Israel, possibly helping the Jewish people rebuild their third temple. But they will also be standing there and condemning the world system. They will also be able to do supernatural acts like calling down fire from heaven, shooting fire out of their mouth, stopping the rain. I mean, they can do all manners of things, and nobody's going to be able to touch them for 3.5 years until their time is complete. Now, I mentioned the word tribulation earlier. Really, this is just a term that most Christians have become familiar with. But the actual official name of it is called Daniel's 70th week. And what it is a week of years. So it's going to be a total of 7 years. And these are prophetic years. So these are 360-day years. So 30-day months, 360-day years. And it's divided into two parts. It's got 3.5 years at the beginning and 3.5 years at the end. And right in the middle point is going to be what we call the abomination of desolation. That is where that Antichrist will set himself up inside of the newly rebuilt Jewish temple into the Holy of Holies, and he will declare himself to be God and demand to be worshiped by everyone. And this is what the false prophet goes out and enforces on pain of death. So this newly rebuilt Jewish temple, likely as there are organizations today that have drawn up models of it, blueprints, videos, even to scale models of what the new temple is going to look like according to the dimensions given, I believe, in the book of Ezekiel. And this organizations such as the Temple Mount Faithful and others have created or have planned on putting video systems throughout the temple so that you could watch the worship, watch things happening inside the temple. And this is how the Antichrist is going to get his message out to the world that he is declaring himself to be God Almighty. Now, uh, during this 7 years, God is going to unleash 21 divine judgments upon the earth. And, currently the world is at 8 billion people roughly. By the midpoint, nearly half of the world's population is going to be dead. So if you think back to all of the wars ever fought in the history of humanity, you're probably looking at the deaths of somewhere in the neighborhood of um, 500 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that's stretching that out over 6,000 years. Um, During the first 3.5 years, 4 billion people are going to be dead. The amount of death and carnage that is going to happen during this period of time is going to be unimaginable. So much so that Jesus called it the worst period of time that's ever been. So he's going even back to the time before the flood and the actual judgment of the flood, saying that it's going to be worse than that. But these 21 judgments are going to totally um, decimate the world's population. They're going to decimate the earth itself, the atmosphere, the stars, everything. And it is a judgment that is coming that essentially is going to purge our physical reality of wickedness. So these 21 judgments are divided up into three series of sevens. Excuse me. You have the first series called the seals. So there's seven seals, and this is found in Revelation chapter 6. And during these seals, um, a fourth of the world's population dies. Now, when I say seals, you may be thinking of an aquatic animal or mammal of some kind. No, these are seals. Like if you had a scroll, a piece of paper that was rolled up, and in ancient times, you'd have a piece of paper rolled up, and on the outside of it, you would have these wax seals that would keep the document closed. It looks something like this, and you'd have these like wax seals. And so these seals are placed like this along the edge of the scroll. And what happens is that in Revelation chapter 5, Jesus is the only one in all of creation, in all of the entire universe, that is found worthy to open these seals. And he's worthy because he is both God and man. He is 100% God and he's 100% man. And he is the only one in all of creation who serves as the bridge between uh, sinful man and a holy, righteous God. And he does that in the role of what we can see, I guess, in the book of Ruth, called the kinsman redeemer. In the Jewish law, in the Levitical law, um, if somebody had gotten themselves into a bit of debt and they're in bondage to another person because of this debt, or they got in some kind of legal trouble and became imprisoned for some offense, the only person that could come and take that person out and free that person was a blood relative. So this is what makes Jesus unique in the realms of humans, angels, and God the Father, God the Holy Spirit, is that in taking on human flesh, what we call the incarnation, he became both God and man, thus becoming our kinsman redeemer who uh, dying on the cross, he was sinless. He was the perfect sacrifice that was able to both satiate God's wrath against sinful and wicked men, as well as not be bound to the wages of death, which are the wages of sin, which is death. So that is why he's able to rise again on the third day. So he gets the scroll in chapter 5. He begins to open these seals. And as he opens these seals, each one unleashes a judgment upon the earth. So the first seal that is opened, it unleashes a rider on a white horse. And this white horse is wearing a Stephanos crown, and he has a bow, like a bow and arrow, but he has no arrow. It's just the bow and his crown, and he's riding forth, conquering and to conquer. And he is who we believe is the false, or the Antichrist, who will go out and he will take charge of all the world's governments and ultimately combine them into one. So he is the one that takes over three and then gains the majority over the rest. And he will ride throughout the 7 years of the tribulation. And the second horse, or the second seal that is unleashed, is the rider on the red horse. And this rider has a great sword and he takes peace from the earth. And so he also rides during the duration of these 7 years. The rider on the black horse is carrying scales in his hand, like a scale that has be able to weigh between two different things, um, like a weight scale. And he is crying out that basically a day's wage would buy you a little piece of bread. And so what he represents is economic calamity and inflation and deflation and everything that you can think of, where the world's economies crash. And now even the working all day long, you would only make enough money to buy a little piece of bread for yourself. So if you're having to support a family or a wife, or maybe some adult children or something, you're not going to be able to make enough. So this is what introduces great starvation to the world's populations. And I believe that he also rides throughout the duration of the 7 years. And then the last rider is a rider on the pale horse, and he is followed by death and hell. And he represents the pale here is not necessarily gray; it's more of a greenish gray, and I believe the Greek is the chloros, and it's a kind of a representation of sickness and of pandemic and viruses and bacteria and disease that spreads throughout the world. And so, in my estimation, what makes these horsemen different than, say, the rest of the seal judgments is that they're going to ride throughout the duration of the 7 years, and they'll be present throughout this time. Now, one thing about the black horse I forgot to mention, he is going to represent economic disparity between most of the population who will be incredibly poor and dying of starvation, not able to make enough money to support themselves, to buy food and things. But the other hand, there's going to be the incredibly wealthy who are saying, "Don't spoil the oil, the wine," and these are going to be people that, through all this problem, still manage to make themselves wealthy and rich. And we see this all the time in different crises that have happened throughout the last couple of centuries. Um, the rich always seem to be in the know and are able to not only weather the storm, but also profit off of it. And this certainly happened through COVID and other, recent events that have happened. So now we get to the fifth seal, and this is the martyrdom of those who refuse to worship the beast. And we call these folks the tribulation saints. So these folks are not the church. The church is gone. The church is removed off of the earth at the rapture. These are folks who have come to faith after the rapture of the church. And whether through videos like this or material they find or other things that lead them to the truth, which is that Jesus is the Christ and that salvation is found only through Him, they place their faith in Christ after the rapture of the church. So these folks, should they survive, would enter into the kingdom at the end of the 7 years, and they're still physical mortal bodies, and then be restored physically so that they could live to be 1,000 years old, and be um, rid of any ailments or things that would have plagued them in the normal world. But now these folks are found themselves in a world that is wholly, and I say holy, I mean WHOLLY, wholly given over to Satan, and it is incredibly hostile to anybody that places their faith in Jesus. Anybody that pretends uh, to worship the Antichrist but isn't really, they're going to be found out. Anybody that is still trying to worship Allah, or through Islam or through Hinduism or through Buddhism or any of these other religions, are going to be found out, and they're going to basically be persecuted to the point to where they have to convert by the midpoint to worshiping this man Antichrist. Now, those people that have placed their faith in Jesus, um, it shows here that there's going to be a great soul harvest. There's going to be more people saved at the beginning of the tribulation, which is right after the rapture, um, than at any point in time in the last 2,000 years. We believe this is going to be a number so great that when John sees them in Revelation 7, he can't even count the number. He has no that he just it's just a number that blows his mind. So there's going to be a lot of these people that come to faith after the rapture of the church, and a majority of them, or probably most of them, are going to find themselves on the chopping block with their heads cut off, um, because they refuse to bend the knee to Antichrist and they refuse to take the mark. So uh, this is the fifth seal judgment. Now, the sixth seal judgment, there is a great earthquake that is the greatest earthquake to date on the earth. It causes such calamity upon the world that it basically obscures, through dust and ash and other things. It obscures the sun and the moon and the stars from around the world, so people are not able to see them anymore, and the world's going to seems like it's going to get a lot dimmer, um, like the shades have been drawn on the world at this point, and it obscures, it obscures the heavens essentially. And then the seventh seal is going to be silence in heaven. Now that doesn't sound like a judgment necessarily for, at first glance, but when you think about all of the scenes in heaven that we get throughout the Bible, whether it's, in the book of Job chapter 1 and 2, Isaiah chapter 6, Daniel chapter 7 and 8, I believe, Revelation chapter 5, 4 and 5, and other places, uh, heaven is always noisy. It's noisy with the worship and the singing of the angels, declaring the holiness of God. And so, for heaven to be silent, there is this ominous feel to it, like you're walking through the woods and you're hearing the normal sounds of nature, and then all of a sudden everything goes quiet. Not even the crickets are chirping, the birds aren't chirping, nobody's making a sound. And that usually only happens when a predator is in the area. And so here, all of heaven goes silent, and there's this ominous tension building moment where the trumpet judgments are about to be unleashed. And the seventh seal allows for the first trumpet judgment to begin. So what happens is these angels begin, one after the other, begin to blow their trumpets. And at the first trumpet, there was a great storm of hail and fire mixed with blood that is cast on the earth. And a third of the trees and the green grass are burnt up. Now, it doesn't specify where this happens necessarily, but my theory is that according to the Audubon Society and the studies they've done over the last couple of decades, a third of all the trees and grass in the world is in the Americas. That's North, South, Central, and South America. It is possible that the Americas get taken out as a means to like channelize the world's populations all back to the old world. Um, so people would be forced to move. Now, how this takes place, it's anyone's guess, really. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. But one possibility is that the Yellowstone caldera volcano, the super volcano, erupts, and it shoots so much um, lava and rock and everything into the atmosphere that it appears like it's coming down from the heavens. Another thing is it could be a comet or a meteor of some kind that strikes the earth and it hits the world in a certain place. Now, if uh, if this rain of hail and fire mingled with blood, if this is a global event, regardless, a third of the trees and the grass are burnt up. So either way, this it's a certainty that it's going to happen. How it happens exactly, we don't know. And that's the way with a lot of these. You take them literal, um, to the point where you say, I don't understand necessarily how it's going to happen. I just know that it will happen. So the next trumpet judgment is going to be this great mountain that's cast into the sea, and it appears as a giant rock meteor, slab of mountain itself. For example, in the Canary Islands, there's these volcanoes there that if one of them was to erupt to the magnitude that it could, half of that mountain would fall into the Atlantic Ocean. But what happens here is that a third of the oceans are turned to blood. Now, um, a third of the oceans out of the ones, Pacific, Indian, Arctic, etc. A third of the oceans is the Atlantic Ocean. So again, it seems to maybe reinforce this idea that the Western Hemisphere is going to be cut off from the rest of what's happening in the old world. And by the old world, I mean, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, where most of human history has occurred. So the next trumpet judgment is a meteor that's called wormwood. And wormwood, uh, this meteor, whatever this astrological event or astronomical um, um, material is that hits the earth, it poisons uh, a third of the world's fresh drinking water. So in the world today, there's the world's 98% oceans and salt water, and there's about 2.5%, maybe 3% of that of all the water in the world is fresh drinking water. So here, a third of that 3% is going to be taken out and undrinkable. You know, when people drink it, they'll die. It'll be poisonous. So something happens here that begins to limit the amount of fresh water available from people to drink from. Now, the fourth trumpet judgment, we see a third of the sun, moon, and the stars are darkened. And again, as these things are striking the earth, it leads me to believe that the earth's atmosphere becomes incredibly clouded over with ash and dust and rock and all other things, and maybe um, such atmospheric pollutants, if you will, that all these lights that we would look out and see now are dimmed by a third, and so that will obviously have ramifications, atmospheric ramifications upon the Earth as far as the temperature, the climate, storming, things like that. So, you know, I think in these first four, you're going to start to see even places that aren't necessarily impacted directly are going to be feeling the ramifications of it through nature as these second and third order effects begin to kick in when the sun is blocked out or the moon is blocked out. So, with all these obscurations, the fourth trumpet judgment, or excuse me, that was the fourth. The fifth trumpet judgment begins what we call the woes. So the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpet judgments are the first, second, and third woe. So the first woe, which is also the fifth trumpet judgment, unleashes a demonic army from the abyss. And these, when you read through, I believe in chapter 8, uh, they appear so strange and so bizarre looking that theologians for millennia have tried to wrestle with what they are. But we know they're not natural locusts because in the book of Proverbs it says that locusts don't have a king, yet they advance in ranks. You know, they just do this intuitively and through their natural instinct. But these locusts have a king, and his name is Abaddon in the Hebrew, and in the Greek he is called Apollo, or Apollyon rather. And he leads them out of the abyss, and they have these weird shaped bodies like locusts, yet they have tails like a scorpion. They have a hair like a woman. They've kind of got this like human face, but they've got teeth like lion, and they have these wings, and they appear to be covered in armor or metal. And so when they beat their wings and they fly, it sounds like a really great army. And the thing about these is that they go out and they begin to sting men, and they can't kill men, and men can't die during this period of time, which is strange enough in and of itself. But the sting is so painful it lasts for 5 months, and people are going to start trying to kill themselves because it's so painful. So I'm from Texas. We have fire ants, and we have wasp, hornets, and all that other stuff. But we also have a lot of scorpions. So the sting of a scorpion is very painful. These things are so painful that the sting lasts for 5 months. So you're in agony for 5 months from one sting. And I can't really have anything that I can equate to it. Um, there's really nothing in the natural world today that is that terrifying. Maybe murder hornets or something like that, but um, even still, these things go out, and if you don't have the mark of God on your forehead, if you have, for instance, you have the mark of the beast, you're fair game for these things. They can just go out and torment you. Um, but just like Satan institutes this mark of the beast, God also begins to mark his people on the forehead. Now, who they are that he marks, we know that there's 144,000 uh, Jewish male virgins who are marked on the forehead. Other than that, I don't know who else is marked. Maybe every believer in Christ is marked, but we know absolutely that the 144,000 are marked. And these are 12,000 Jewish male virgins from each of the 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. So it's 144,000. Um, the belief is that they will go out and become great witnesses for the Lord and for the kingdom to come, um, being Jews, but also believing in Jesus as Messiah. So Messianic Jews, how old they are, we don't know. We just know that they're Jewish male virgins from the 12 tribes. I know there are a lot of religious groups out there today who think that they are the 144,000. They are not. These people have not yet come out or come forth yet. So they have not arrived. It's not the Jehovah Witnesses. It's not the Mormons. It's not any particular Christian denomination or any other group. These people have not come yet, but they will come from the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the second woe is a massive army. Again, it's believed to be a demonic army. They ride forth in the Middle East and they kill a third of mankind. So this is how we know that we're going to get to about half of the population being dead from both the judgments prior to this, as well as this demonic army. And I believe the army is 200 million that ride forth. And I know a lot of theologians in past decades have believed this to be the Chinese because at present they can field a 200 million man army, but it's not them. We won't see that the kings of the east rise up until the very end. So this demonic army goes forth riding and just begin killing a whole bunch of people. And then the last woe, or the third woe, is going to be these terrifying lightnings and voices and thunders and a great earthquake and a great hail that strike the earth. And basically at this point, the angels begin to call the kingdoms of the earth are now subject or have come under the thumb of the kingdom of God. And you know, in basketball terms, you might call this a shot caller, somebody that can, or maybe in baseball. Remember when Babe Ruth, pointed to whatever section of the stadium he was going to hit his home run to. He pointed his bat out that direction, signaling like that's where he's going to nail this ball to. Well, this is what the angels are doing. They're basically calling it before it's even over with. They know it's done. So the seventh trumpet allows for the seven bowl judgments to come forth, or vials, like vials, like you would have a pitcher. Um, and the first bowl judgment um, unleashes these grievous sores on anybody who took the mark of the beast. So if you had taken the mark of the beast at some point earlier in the 7 years, now this mark is festering and it's pussing and it's incredibly painful. It's an infected. And, if you had it on your forehead or you had it on your hand, now you're going to be just suffering and miserable because this mark is going to become infected. And the second bowl judgment is that the rest of the seas, the rest of the oceans turn to blood. So in the trumpet judgment, we saw that uh, a third of the oceans, now all of the oceans are turned to blood. And what that means, all the second, third, and fourth order effects, all the sea life will die. And the smell from that would be incredibly heinous. Like you can't even, I don't know if you've smelled dead fish before, but imagine every beach in the world just foaming up dead things, whales, dolphins, fish. I mean, everything is going to die in the ocean. And then the smell from that would be incredibly horrible. And then another effect of this is going to be that all ship traffic, all seafaring vessels will cease to be able to travel the oceans because their engines will get gunked up and just traveling across blood is not going to be feasible anymore. So ocean travel is going to be closed off, and to include submarines and any other thing that operates, um, anything that machine wise that operates in the oceans is not going to be able to do it anymore. So people are going to be landlocked. Um, and obviously, this will have atmospheric effects again. And right now we're kind of under this cycles of the La Nina and El Nino cycles, based on the warmth of the water in the Pacific and how that blows uh, eastward. Well, we get our weather patterns here in the United States. Well, this is going to greatly impact that as well. So we don't know exactly how that will play out necessarily, but it will have a great impact. Um, Now, the third bowl judgment is going to turn the rest of the rivers and the fountains to blood. So, in the trumpet judgments, a third of the fresh waters were taken, poisoned. Now they're all turned to blood. So, um, the places where people had previously been able to draw fresh water from now can't. And this seems to indicate to me that this is towards the very end of the 7 years, because humans can't go very long without water. But then again, they may be supernaturally sustained so that they stay alive, yet they're perpetually thirsty and dehydrated and constantly, this is like if you're seeing the picture here, you're starting to see what hell's going to be like for all eternity. And all of these judgments are meant to turn people to God, but they don't. They, by the midpoint or after the midpoint, people's hearts are so hardened and so angry and bitter against God that they refuse to turn to Him, despite what happens. Number four, the fourth bowl is a great heat is poured out upon the world. Now, it we don't know exactly how this will play out, but if the Earth's atmosphere gets darkened, it seems like reason would lead you to believe that it would get colder, because the sun is what provides the heat for the Earth. But here it's kind of the opposite. Yes, the sun is obscured from the Earth by a third, yet it gets hotter. So something supernatural is happening here, and this will have, this could potentially be the sun beginning to supernova to some degree, or begin to expand out, or to die, or something, as these stars go through these cycles. But a great heat happens simultaneous to the fact that the earth is darkened at the same time. Now, number five is the great darkness over the seat of the beast kingdom. So, wherever the beast, this Antichrist, has his headquarters, which I believe is probably going to be in or around Jerusalem, uh, it's going to be great darkness over the land. So dark that it's painful. A darkness that is so pitch black that it produces pain. And this is what impacts the beast kingdom here. If you've ever been into those caverns where you can take those tours in caverns, like in Texas, they have the Natural Bridge Caverns, and during the part of the trip, they'll turn all the lights off, and you'll just see how dark it is, and it's so dark you can't see your hand in front of your face. Well, this is that darkness. So multiply that by the intense heat, the lack of water, the darkness, and you're starting to get a picture of what hell is going to be like, and the horrific smells that are going to be there. And then you have bowl judgment number 6, which is the Euphrates River drying up, and it allows for the kings of the east to begin to march on Jerusalem. So this man takes over the world, this Antichrist. He promises all these things, and by the midpoint, he declares himself to be God. So he's this like tyrannical, the world's worst dictator that's ever lived, and he's in control of the entire earth. And you have nations like China, India, Japan, and these what we call the kings of the East that will rise up against him and begin to march against him, and they're going to try and defeat him. And all they're suffering under these tremendous judgments, and the oceans are turned to blood, and the smells and the heat. So everybody's miserable, and they are all blaming him. And what's interesting is that Satan had unleashed these three demonic frogs spirits, demonic spirits, but they look like frogs to some degree. And they go forth to gather all the kings to fight. And I think in a way that they set out to maybe fight him. But during the course of this, they are persuaded to fight against Christ. And so they begin to march. And as the Euphrates River is dried up, it allows them to cross these massive armies to cross. Now, As I said earlier, the seas are not going to be viable anymore as a means of transportation. The air is likely not going to be available anymore for transportation because of all the obscurations and the ash and the dust and all the junk in the air. Um, and also the heat and everything else. So flying is not really an option. So they're landlocked and they're basically forced to march westward towards Jerusalem. And the Euphrates River has what we've seen recently here dried up, not because of divine providence or anything, but because the headways of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, you know, they start up in Turkey, and Turkey had dammed that water source up and has not been allowing a lot of water to go down. So in the dry years, like we've recently seen there, the Euphrates River is really low, almost to the point of being completely dried up. And a lot of people have thought that that was perhaps this being fulfilled, but it's not. I believe that between now and that time, the Euphrates River is going to go back to its normal depths and width and everything as far as however deep it is. I've flown over it a few times in the Army, but I couldn't tell you. I'm sure it varies at different places how deep it is and how wide it is. But this whole river system, the Tigris and Euphrates, will dry up and allow for these massive armies to march against the Antichrist. Now, as I said too, these demonic spirits begin to, um, I guess, change the leadership's perspective of who they're going to fight. Uh, so they are not necessarily now marching against the Antichrist where they started out to, but now they're going to be they're being rallied there supernaturally. And then you have this massive earthquake that we see in the bowl judgment number 7. That is the worst earthquake the world's ever seen. It's so great that it divides Israel up. It levels every mountain. It sinks every island. This is how great this earthquake is. And to be honest, we have no idea on the Richter scale what that would be. Maybe like a 20 or something like, but it is going to level mountains and sink islands. Now, if we remember back to the great earthquake in, I want to say 2011 in Japan that caused the tsunami and the this terrible destruction in Japan there. That earthquake was a 9.0 and it moved the island of Japan 8 inches. This earthquake is going to be so powerful that it would sink Japan. And Japan's not going to even be an island anymore. Okinawa, Hawaii, any other islands you can think of are going to be gone. And the mountains, Mount Everest, and these other mountains are going to be flattened as well, the Himalayas. So this is this terrible, terrible earthquake, and you're seeing vast changes in the topography of the earth. And so, as this army is marching over towards Jerusalem, they're repurposed, if you will, remissioned, and now they begin to amass in the valley of Megiddo, and this is where we get this the Battle of Armageddon from, is where they're massing these armies in this gigantic valley in Israel called Megiddo, and they don't fight the battle there. Rather, that is where it's like a staging area, if you will. But as they do this, Christ returns with the armies of heaven in tow behind him, and what happens is the sky peels open like a scroll. It just peels apart, and you see Christ riding forth on his white horse, robe dipped in blood. I mean, in his full glory, returning to destroy the earth, the armies of the earth, and all the armies of heaven behind him. This is the church that will be riding behind him, the angels and others, I imagine. Um, and what happens is these armies who were initially going to fight the Antichrist now turn their weapons against Christ and try to fight him. And all he has to do is simply speak words, and these armies begin to evaporate in front of him, explode into fine mist of blood and guts and everything. Um, and he rides forth, and basically this fighting will take place in about a 200-mile stretch south around the Dead Sea, and it'll come back up on the western side of, or the eastern side rather, of, or along the Jordan River, going up that way back toward Jerusalem, where the rest of the armies are finally wiped out. And here, what's interesting is that at the end of this battle, which is over seemingly very quickly, um, all these armies, the world's greatest army arrayed against Christ, are wiped out in literally just a very short period of time. And here, what's interesting is that the Antichrist, this man who calls himself the Antichrist, or he may call himself the beast, rather, he is going to, him and the false prophet will be cast alive into the lake of fire. Now, why that's interesting is because at the end of Revelation 20, we see that that all these people, everybody that's ever lived that is not a Christian, not born again, not had placed their faith in God, the true God of the Bible, they will face God as their creator, and they're going to be judged according to what's written in the books on them, and they will be cast into the lake of fire, where the beast, the Antichrist, and the false prophet have already been for 1,000 years. So these two are going to get, they're not even going to the throne, great white throne judgment. They're just cast straight head first into the lake of fire. And they're going to be there 1,000 years before anybody else is there. So after this, after the Battle of Armageddon, after the false prophet and the beast are cast alive into the lake of fire, we have what's called the judgment of the nations, or in Matthew 25, the sheep and goat judgment. And this is where Christ judges the remaining nations, those who aided Israel and came to her defense during the 70th week are going to be allowed entrance into the earthly millennial kingdom, which is the one where Christ is going to rule and reign from Jerusalem for 1,000 years. Um, those who attacked Israel or betrayed Israel or did Israel wrong, they are going to be cast into outer darkness and basically into hell, awaiting for that final great white throne judgment. Now, what happens after this sheep and goat judgment? You'll have the millennial reign of Christ. So, millennial being 1,000 years. This is found in Revelation 20. 1,000 years is mentioned 6 times, so we know the length of it is 1,000 years. It's a literal 1,000 years. It's not hypothetical. It's not metaphorical. It's a literal 1,000 years, and Christ is going to rule from Jerusalem for 1,000 years. And the church, those people that lived in the church age, we at the rapture we were changed into these glorified immortal bodies. We were going to rule and reign with Him, and Christians that were faithful in this life, doing the things God called them, He's going to make them in charge of many things. And those who weren't, who were just kind of nominal Christians, or they were saved, but they didn't really follow Christ to the fullest that they could have, will be charged over just a few things. And so it's going to be a merit-based um, um, theocracy, where the church is going to rule and reign with Christ on the earth, and the Old Testament saints who had died before Christ came, but were righteous, and were redeemed by their faith in God and their faith in the Jesus who is coming, the Messiah who is coming, will also be gained entrance into the kingdom, and as well as the remnant of Jews who survive the tribulation. So the amount of people that actually make it into the kingdom on that day will not be a whole lot of people. You'll have the remnant of Jews, the third of the Jews will make it through. You'll have a percentage, I guess, of each of the types of people in the world, Africans, Middle Easterners, Europeans, etc. Um, and the different ethnicities, I would suppose. Um, but starting off with a small population is not a stretch in the Bible terms, because we know Adam and Eve created it. They were the first two humans, and out of them came the human race. We know that God started the world over again after the flood with Noah and his wife, and then their 3 sons and their sons' wives, so a total of 8 people. And by the year 1900, the world population was at 2 billion, and by 2020, I believe 2020, the world's population was right at 8 billion. So during this millennial kingdom, during this 1,000 year reign of Christ, where after the tribulation's over with, Christ supernaturally restores the world to its like Eden-like um, nature, meaning that perfect weather, perfect environment. The natural world will not be at war against itself. Lions are not going to be hunting um, gazelles or anything like that. They're just going to be eating grass like the ox. Um, During this time, children can play with cobras and they don't have to worry about it being bit or anything like that. Wolves and lambs will lie down together and play, and so basically nothing is hunting anything anymore. There's no sin, there's no wickedness, no violence. But yet there's going to be people in this kingdom age who are not redeemed in the sense of like the church, right? The church is glorified. We're giving these new bodies with new natures that we won't have these sinful natures anymore. But the natural people that make it into the kingdom will still have their natural bodies. Now, I believe that they will be restored physically to the degree that they could live to 1,000 years if they wanted to, but they're still mortal in the sense that they could die. And so those nations who refuse to worship God or Christ there in Jerusalem and refuse to come up and pay homage to Him, they will not receive any rain in their land. And those people, individuals who don't make a decision for Christ by the time they turn 100 will die. And other people will look at them as children, like you died at 100. That's like if you died at the age of 5 or something. It's inconceivable at that point, but there will be some who do it because humans still have free will. And so during this 1,000 years of Christ ruling and reigning perfectly on the earth, and the church ruling and reigning with him, this world population is going to explode into numbers the world's not even seen yet, probably north of 20 billion people. And you got to remember that all of the earth is going to be restored. So the Sahara Desert's not going to be there anymore. The Arctic, where these places that are inhospitable to humans living are not going to exist anymore. Everywhere is going to be fertile ground with green, lush grass and just back to the times of like Eden where the world was perfect. So the world population explodes, but at the end of this, and during this whole time, Satan is the best part of this is Satan is bound in chains in the abyss. So at the end of the tribulation, after the second coming, Antichrist and the false prophet are cast alive into the lake of fire, where Satan is also bound. The archangel Michael binds him with these chains, and whatever. I'm sure God can make chains that can bind an angel like Lucifer, but he's bound and then cast into the abyss for 1,000 years. So he's not able to influence the world. Neither are any of his wicked, demonic, brethren, the fallen angels. Um, they're they're not allowed to influence anything either. So people will be living in a world without the influence of Satan corrupting everything in in this perfect environment for 1,000 years. And even at the end of this, um, God allows Satan to come out for what it says is a short season in Revelation 20. We don't know how long that is. I'm thinking a year to 3 years, somewhere in there. And during this time, Satan is able to get so many people to follow him. It will seem like this massive army that will march against Jerusalem, where Christ is ruling there. During this moment, Christ calls down fire from heaven and just consumes these armies in a moment, and it's over with. And then those people who chose to side with Satan at the last minute will immediately go into the great white throne judgment and be cast alive into the lake of fire forever and ever. And all of the peoples who have ever lived, going back to uh, Cain and Abel, um, all the way through the rest of time, will stand before God and have to give an account for their lives and what is written in the books. And the righteous will hear, welcome, thou good and faithful servant. And then those who did not know Christ or who did not have a relationship with him or were wicked will be cast into the lake of fire. And then that begins what we call the eternal age. So we know in Ephesians chapter 2 that there are ages to come. Um, plural ages. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it simply the eternal age, but really the eternal age begins after the millennial kingdom. So the millennial kingdom, where Christ is ruling from the earth for 1,000 years, is really like the front porch to eternity. But we also know that there are ages, and there's still going to be time going forward. So there's going to be things uh, happening into eternity future. So that is the overview of the things to come in a nutshell. Obviously, the Bible goes into much more detail than I have here. We know in Revelation 21 and 22 that we see a new heaven and a new earth are created. Um, the universe is basically purged. Humans, uh, everybody that enters into this time will be in their glorified bodies, and so we'll be able to exist and live where God is, and we'll be able to traverse the universe or traverse wherever the world, wherever God is, the new worlds, the new dimensions, whatever He has created for us to explore and to inhabit. We will do so in physical bodies. We won't be wispy spirits per se. We'll be physical and intangible, like we can touch your body, you can eat, you can um, sit down in chairs and things like that, and sleep, or lay down or play instruments or whatever it is that you want to do. Um, but you're not going to be constrained by the laws of physics anymore. We'll be able to travel at the speed of thought. If I'm on Earth and I want to visit the next galaxy, I can just think about it and I'm there, and I'll be able to traverse through space with not even, I won't have to worry about breathing or the cold or the heat or any of that stuff. That I'll be impermeable to all of that. Um, so that's what God has in store for us in the future. It's not going to simply be sitting in a cloud in some kind of endless church service. We're going to be um, extremely happy, extremely content. We will never be bored with God, which is a tall ask, because if you have eternity in the future, um, that means that we will have to be forever perpetually happy, perpetually fulfilled and full of joy, and that doesn't um, seem to lead one to believe that we would be bored after the first 100 million years or something. No, we'll never be bored ever again, and we'll never find the end of God throughout all of this. Now, let me go back to the beginning of this entire discussion, that if you find yourself and the rapture's happened, you know, millions of people have suddenly disappeared off the earth. It's not UFOs, it's not aliens, it's not Gaia purging the earth. It's not any of those things. What it is the rapture, that Christ took the church from the earth so that we could be where He is, and we are in a sense, um, His body, right? So we know that He rose after His resurrection. He rose, ascended into heaven on the 40 days after His resurrection. He is the head, we are the body, and this is the body of believers. So if that day happens, guarantee you that massive chaos is going to happen. Now, here's what I wrote down as, I call them, the rules for the remnant. Do place your faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ, death, burial, and resurrection. If nothing else, the rapture of the church should fully convince you that what Jesus said is true. John 14, 1 through 3. Jesus said, I'm going away to prepare a place for you. And if I go away, I'll come back and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. So, speaking to the church, this is who that applies to. He came back to take us to be where He is. Um, in order to do this, you admit you're a sinner and you need a Savior. You can find accompanying scriptures in Romans 3:23 and 6:23, and then B, that was part A. B is believe in your heart in the Lord Jesus Christ died for your sins and was buried, and God raised Him from the dead. John 3:16, and then Romans 5:8. And then C, call upon the name of the Lord, trusting in the Lord Jesus Christ for salvation, and that's found in Romans 10:9 through 13. That's the ABCs of salvation. Now, number two, do not take the mark of the beast. And it seems like a simple thing to think of right now, but when you can't buy anything or sell anything and nobody will help you and you have access to no systems or nothing and you're completely shut out from the society, um, once hunger kicks in, you're going to be very tempted to want to do this. But I'm telling you, you might be able to fill your belly for 7 years, but it is definitely not worth eternity in the lake of fire. It's not worth it. It is not worth what's coming. It's better to die and immediately be in the spirit, rather than spend eternity separated from God in hell forever. Um, Revelation 14:9 through 11 speaks that the wrath of God is going to be poured out eternally on those who take this mark of the beast, because it's not simply taking a mark to buy and sell. You're placing it's like an act of worship. You're aligning yourself with this Antichrist. And this Antichrist is such a wicked and devious person, um, that he doesn't even go to the great white throne judgment. He's just cast in the lake of fire head first, 1,000 years ahead of everybody else. And that's who this mark of the beast represents. You're taking this mark as a mark of ownership that the Antichrist owns you. Um, and so you don't want to do that. It's better to starve, better to die of thirst, or better to be completely shut out of the system than to take this mark. Now, number three is more of a mindset to embrace. You're probably going to become martyred. And that's not what anybody wants to hear, but the beast system will be vast. Um, you know, if there are people alive today that think that you can hide from the Antichrist, that you're going to be able to get in a bunker and eat beanie weenies for the next 7 years and survive this. Don't be lulled into that mindset. The beast system is going to be vast. It's going to be global. He will have artificial intelligence working with him. He will have demonic intelligence working with him. He will have all of the world's resources, um, global surveillance, satellite surveillance, infrared technology, cameras, forward-looking infrared. He will have satellite surveillance of the world. You've got Elon Musk right now setting up Starlink, that's putting satellites over the entire Earth to provide, right now it's to provide free Wi-Fi anywhere you go, but eventually that system will be turned against humanity and will become a global prison in all intents and purposes. Um, so the chances of you surviving this are slim, very slim. There will be very few that actually do survive it, apart from God supernaturally protecting you. You're probably going to die. I think going into it knowing that and steeling your mind right now for that eventuality, should you find yourself in that situation, um, will help you make that decision easier. Because being fed or being able to drink for a couple of years that staves off the short term suffering gains you an eternity in the lake of fire. It is not worth the trade off. Is so upside down. It is not worth it. Nobody in their right mind would, you know, trade in a $20,000 car for a $10 billion car that they can't even hope to pay off. I mean, that's such a lopsided deal at 999% interest rate. You'll never ever ever pay that off, and you only make say 40,000 a year. That is the worst deal in the history. So the actual worst deal is to take this mark of the beast. Um, and I'm telling you, at the time when it comes, it's going to seem like the answer, the cure all for so many things: identity theft, access to your banking, access to digital currency, access to shopping and living your life, trying to keep the status quo going. Um, there is no more status quo. That's gone. You need to steel your mind and ready yourself and resolve yourself to face death rather than take the mark, um, because there is no upside to taking the mark at all. And then the last part is endure to the end if you can. I'm not saying that there won't be survivors. There will be people that physically survive the tribulation. run, hide, pray. If you survive and live to see the end of the second coming as a believer in Jesus, you will enter into the kingdom in your physical body, and you will be one of the patriarchs, if you will, of the new kingdom age, the new 1,000 years. And you'll live to be 1,000 years. You'll live to see your children, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, your great great grandchildren, your 10, 20, 30 generations worth of kids. You'll be the great patriarchs that have survived the tribulation, and the tales that you'll have to tell about the way the world was then, and the horrors, and how Christ rescued the world from certain destruction. Because if Christ hadn't intervened, the Antichrist would absolutely just kill everybody and destroy everything. No flesh would survive. So, again, if you can endure to the end, recognize that it's 7 years. There's going to be markers throughout this that you can tell where you are. Obviously, the midpoint, when you see the Antichrist declaring himself to be God in the newly rebuilt or the rebuilt Jewish temple, um, you're at the halfway point. You have 3.5 years left to go, and if you're able to make it, survive, more power to you. But just do it as a believer in Jesus, and so at the end of that you can um, enter into the kingdom and the rest that the Lord is going to bring upon the earth, the Sabbath rest for 1,000 years. So that's all I have. I hope that this finds you. I hope that this message is received with an open mind, and that you were able to take this message and make good use of it. And I also encourage you to find a Bible and to begin reading it. And if you are a believer after the rapture, and you find a Bible, when you go to Revelation, the book of Revelation, it is not an insurmountable book to understand. It's rather quite easy. Revelation chapter 1, verse 19, the Bible tells you the book tells you how to read Revelation. It says, he tells John, Jesus is telling John, write the things you've seen, which is in chapter 1, the things which are chapters 2 and 3, the 7 letters to the 7 churches, and 7 representing all of the churches during the church age, because 7 is the number of completion. And then write the things that which will happen thereafter. So after the rapture is chapter 4 on. And basically you can read through that. And if you had a Bible going through this time period, um, you can keep tabs of what judgments just happened, and you'll kind of know where you are in time. So um, I know a lot of believers out there are stocking up their houses now, with food, water, weapons, ammunition, um, hygiene products, medicine, things to survive on, with the mindset that in the case that they're gone, people like you, or people that find this after the fact, will um, have resources. And I know a lot of believers are doing this right now. So um, pray that the Holy Spirit guides you to those places and helps you to survive and to withstand that evil day that's coming upon the world to test all of the inhabitants on the earth. So, with that said, Godspeed, and we'll see you in the kingdom.